Discourse about development in Africa has gained so much attention since the period after the independence wave. There have been various controversies surrounding the concepts and conceptualizations of development in the global terrain, especially when it hangs on specific disciplines and particular climes. Some of these controversies include the accepted definition of development, yardstick for measuring development, and the interpretation of development.
The concept of development is an elusive term. It is multifaceted, multidimensional. Everyone is likely to respond to that question based on several factors. Your background, when I say background, your social background, your discipline, and of course your understanding of the world itself.
Development starts with the appreciation of the fact that you are at a particular place and space, and you want to enhance the quality of your life vis-a-vis what is on ground. So it's an endeavor to improve upon what you met on ground. That's development.
I think it's a concept that puts people at its heart. And I think of it somehow at putting people at its heart and being able to ensure that every person can achieve their needs and then be able to focus on their wants. And to be able to do this in a context that really, we don't live in a world of infinite resources, right? So to be able to do this in the context of really consideration of our resources.
The real meaning of development, according to African thoughts, is movement towards excellence in your field. Things that can make you happy. If you are moving towards that, you are developing. No matter what you gather around you can give you pleasure and so on, but you are not developing, you are just growing. So, economics, they differentiate between growth and development.
We often define development as economic growth plus prosperity. Some would say economic growth plus advancement in structures. And some would say, as we usually have it now within the context of the 21st century, that is, it's an economic growth plus economic transformation.
A lot of the definitions we have seen about development seem to me very abstract, very elusive, very difficult to pin down, very difficult to assess in a pragmatic, empirical manner. And this creates a problem for the researcher in finding a midpoint at which we can say, this is when we have found development.
We make a huge mistake if we continue to assume that development means something that all of us can understand. It is something that we all don't understand. It is something we all don't agree on. It is something that is therefore, very diversified. And I want to argue today that development as a paradigm is an instrument of colonization. And that the only way to arrive at that diversification in the meaning of development is to decolonize and deconstruct what has become the dominant paradigm.
International agencies such as the World Bank and IMF have proposed benchmarks that can be used to measure levels of development globally. These benchmarks have also been recommended as yardsticks for achieving and leapfrogging development in Africa.
The African reality vis-a-vis the universal benchmark that is used. All those organizations, the World Bank, the IMF, and all the rest of them, they are not headquartered in Africa. They are headquartered in Europe and in America. Okay, that tells you, if you need something from them, you have to go there. And the fact that you have to go there, in Yoruba we say, okay, Longwa. All right, that is the hand of the giver is always on top. All right, when you are receiving, you are receiving. Okay, you are not on par with the person that is giving to you. And that's what it is. So when we go there, we have our cap in hand. We're not negotiating. We're going to beg for what we need. And they will determine what we are going to get vis-a-vis what they believe that we need.
What they believe that we need.
Yes, what they believe that we need.
Let's start from the days of the Millennium Development Goals. Okay, they actually gave us a format, a template for which we could actually direct our development agenda. And that is what the SDG has come up to actually fortify, giving African countries as well as other developing countries across the globe a template to really focus their attention on that. Oh, should you want to leapfrog from being a developing country to a developed country, then these are areas that you need to look into. But unfortunately, many of these developing countries also keep waiting for the developed world to assist them or to begin to teach them on which way to go in order to be able to leapfrog effectively.
Clearly, the fact that, that all these institutions have worked elsewhere and have failed in Africa should tell us a thing or two. Because central to human development, or central to any definition of development, is what happens to the human person.
I would say that these institutions mean well for developments in Africa. However, it is also important for Africans to also appreciate the fact that they are also in business for business. And that is why I do not think that World Bank will give you funds without asking for interest, because these are pool of funds donated by certain interests across the globe, and they have to give account to all their stakeholders. That's number one. So it's a case of the sayings of Adam Smith, that it is not the will of the butcher that is giving you free meat, or the will of the baker that is giving you free loaves, but because of his own selfish interest. Yes, the World Bank, the IMF may appear to be a development saint in quotes. However, it also behooves this recipient country to know exactly what they want.
Oftentimes, these universal recommendations may have worked in the global north, but for the global south, it appears that it is a mere mirage chasing. From an African perspective, do we really need these universal yardsticks to achieve development in Africa?
Even across sectors, I'm an economist. For a traditional economist, development is very, very different for someone who's, for example, an anthropologist or sociologist or someone who's working in the medical sector. And so if we don't have a common understanding of the word development, then creating a universal yardstick around it becomes very difficult.
There is a universal yardstick. Yeah, but the universality of standard, the benchmark that you use to determine what is development, is geopolitical.
Okay.
People talk about the development of Africa is not on par with development on the rest of the world. All right. The development of Europe is different from the development of Asia. The same thing with the old, USSR before they broke up. All right. So when you talk about comparing African development against Western or so-called universal global development index, you cannot do that because they are two different animals entirely.
Who decides what a universal yardstick is? Universal is a very big word. And that's problematic because we're working towards something for someone, but is that someone involved in understanding what it means and what it is? Given that we're talking universal here, the chances are not, because it's pretty impossible to get universal consensus on anything. We know on the simplest things now that it's difficult to get consensus.
What they say is universal is oftentimes, and almost 100% of the time, as close as you can get to that, not universal. Is rather what is cultural particularism that is now, for the purpose of control and domination, palmed off on all the unsuspecting victims as something that's universal?
You cannot use universal because the people that control the universal economy, global economy, refuse to share the idea in any language other than their language. So they're always in control. So they're the ones that will determine what kind of benchmark they're going to use for your own development.
The only thing that can be universal is the one that is applicable to all human beings. Man as a generic term. In the origin, you say, in the beginning, God created it and so many other things. On the last day, come, let us make man in our own image. That man means human beings. It's not a man or male or female. Human beings. Let's create human beings in our own image. And that image is the ability to create using your intellect. The power of reason. After you have managed to synchronize your desires, your passions, and your reason, and you become a true human being who wants to be happy. $2 a day may not make you happy. Even $10 a day may not make you happy. So that is a local, to me, a local perception. Cannot be universalized.
One of the development trajectories is the case of individual and communal development in Africa. In the African development actualization, are these two levels of development mutually exclusive? Which of them should be prioritized, and for what reason?
I have always thought that there are two ways to look at development. First, at the level of the individual, then at the level of the community. It's a little easy to discuss development at the level of the individual. For example, if you were in primary 6 last year and this year you are in GS1, it's a measure of development. If you were poor last year and you are rich this year, you can easily conclude that you have developed. So at the individual level, it's a lot easy because you are measuring between what you were and what you are now. So we can here say that it could mean increased in capacity, increase in skill, because if yesterday you were not a tradesman and you've gone for training and you have become a mechanic or a tailor, it's development. So at the level of the individual, we can easily conclude that it is when you have increased capacity to deal with your existence and your reality, you have developed.
Development is a highly contextualized process. It's contextualized not just simply in terms of its localization. It's contextualized because even if there is a common understanding, development is not something that can be done for other societies by other people. They can have a notion of how they can develop, but it is the people themselves who must develop themselves. They have to have an understanding of that.
The personal ones are the little drops that make the mighty ocean. So one building on the street is not a street, it's just a building. But when you have number 1, number 2, number 3, then we have a community. Then community development has to be structured in such a way that we juxtapose it. The individual feeds into the communal, and the communal also directs the individual.
Every community has its own standard of assessment. Yes, to some point, we can say development can be, we can try to have a holistic definition of it that can apply to many societies. But that still does not concur to the point that it is possible to define development in a clearly objective manner that does not take into cognizance in the experiences of each society, does not consider the value system of each society.
Development control, if you go to villages, has always been there. They didn't need a white man to tell them, don't build on this line. We have our setbacks, the gully erosion, you see the water going. Nobody told them to say, you can't build near the river. They will walk from the villages to get water. Why did they say? Because it was close, they wanted to build near the water. So we have our own process of development. At the same way, when you go to the southeast, you have the courtyard system. When you go to the north, you have a closed system where you can't see the Hajias because of the...
Africa of today is not exactly the Africa of yesterday. And because development means increased skill, increase in capacity to deal with our environment, improvement in our way of living, and an advancement on our understanding of nature from what it was yesterday to what it is today, every society has developed. Africa has developed, but perhaps in a different way than what the West expects.
There is no doubt that the major role of any government is to make life comfortable for its citizens in a way of pursuing and sustaining development within their countries. Governments of different African countries have been grappling with developmental ideas that can work for them.
Here, we wait for the West to develop these things and hand it over to us. And we, on our part, we are so lazy that we just open our hands, accept it hook, line, and sinker without any question. You see, let me take us back to 1986 when we're going to accept the structural adjustment program. Then, even though I was very young, but history has it that we had a very vibrant scholars. And then all of these scholars came up, did all they could, and advised the government then, do not accept these policies. But what do we see? The government went ahead, implemented the policies, and here we are today.
Politicians plan on a voting cycle, but development is what's it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, to use the very tacky term. But the point is we can't always make decisions on a voting cycle if we want them to impact, right? In fact, we're also making decisions for future generations who are not even here and who can't even vote. And if we can start having leadership in place that understands that. I mean, it's difficult, right? Because you do need to stay in power. Well, if you want to stay in power, you do need to get votes. But I think the trajectory of thinking and the trajectory of planning needs to be on a longer time scale, given the sort of large amount of work that we have to do.
We often realize that institutions in Nigeria, as well as other developing countries, do not take into cognizance what the people really needs. Me providing for you as a state does not necessarily translate into what the people really want.
I think there needs to be some listening that is done. And obviously that, in acute situations, it's very difficult to do so. But I think even when we think about, let's just take the pandemic management, right? And the aftermath is trying to understand what are people's needs, how we can address them best and move forward and do that.
And I think this is where the problem is. Namely that, and I have said it severally, that whereas Nigerian governors continue to talk exuberantly about their achievements by measurable indicators such as the kilometers of road they have tarred, the traffic lights they have installed, even though many of them stopped working after a year or so. But by pointing out this visible infrastructure, they forget the fact that, again, infrastructure by itself does not constitute development. It is how this helps us to become really human and to achieve our God-given destiny, whichever shape or form we define them. It's only then that we can talk about development, because at the center of development must be the human person.
We pontificate about development on the basis of our own intellectual predilections. We don't ask the people. Our colonial people masters didn't ask us. The leaders who took over from colonial masters didn't ask us.
Development, by whatever models or means we discuss, must be aimed at expanding the space to enable every individual or community pursue what it considers to be happiness.
There's no fast way out, but it has to be very fundamental. I'm a proponent of restructuring, and I don't mean break Nigeria up, no. Over-centralization has never been found to work well, because it means if something goes wrong at the center, it affects every part of the country. But if you have a decentralized government, with the center just taking care of some things that what you do is you'll now have development going at different paces, and people will recognize their own responsibility. It also acts as a brake for the central government, because you will now work within your own resources. And people who decide to work hard will be incentivized in the sense that they can see what their hard work is getting them.
Now, the way to build Africa, in my humble opinion, is to say, let each group develop its own notion of development. Let social and political power be extended to them so that they will be able to use their own understanding of their culture to create a model of development that will resonate with the people, that will make them to be able to contribute to the pool of mankind's heritage instead of copying. Let's go into the world to contribute, not just to borrow. Development is about human capital development. Development is about people. Development is for human beings. Any development that is not human focused is an abstract theory of development.
Without a measurable change in the quality of life that ordinary citizens are living, a country cannot claim to be growing, no matter the size of its skyscrapers, no matter the size of its roads, no matter the size of its infrastructure. Because what is the use having all these infrastructures and in the final analysis, the life of ordinary people does not change?
It is difficult to interrogate the concept of development of a people without touching on their economy. As a matter of fact, the textbook definition of economy has been designed to hinge on development.
In our current world, the concept of development has since found an economic home. Most times when people talk about development here, they refer to it in economic sense. A society is more developed than the other because it's able to produce more and add value to human civilization than the other. Economic value. What is the GDP of this country? What has it been able to achieve? What is the health index? What are the social indices that you need to look at? The World Bank and United Nations have all agreed on certain indices of development. And except, of course, you meet those indices, you are assumed to be underdeveloped. I will give a good example. For the economics will tell you that you cannot survive anything below $2 a day. Any country or any people or any civilization that earns below $2 a day is termed to be underdeveloped. However, they have not considered the fact that in some societies, everything is not monetized. There are people who live in many societies under $2 and still live quite well. But in the context of economic understanding of development, you are poor. You are underdeveloped. You are in need of help. And these are little variables that a universal concept or understanding of the term development has not addressed.
Well, I think some things can be measured. But there's some things, for example, I now use some, when you do GDPs and things like that. I'm not a financial person, but I do know that there are other indicators that speak to how well you're doing. Some indicators favor a certain way you do things, like the GDP. Some other things you look at living standards, I don't know all those things. So I think it's really we should use indicators that capture the totality of what people do and are not skewed to favor one group. Do you understand what I'm saying? So in such a way that you can actually see the breadth of what's going on. Some things capture sort of a narrow, they can be useful if you're all operating the same system, but they may not be useful when you have ignored a number of other indices that may not matter in your community, but show growth in ours.
Many African countries are indebted. They put forward policies that will make them to go to the donors. And the donors now attach conditionalities to the loans released to them for development purposes and all that. So the way the multilateral organizations, the way the external donors view economic development to a large extent affects whatever is happening on the continent of Africa. And that is why today nothing really works.
Between 2011 and 2013, there was this so much hype about China manipulating its own currencies. And I could remember in one of the finance classes that I had while I was in China, we picked up the professor, then Professor Xu, that why is it that China is always manipulating currencies? And the professor was like, we are not manipulating currencies. We are only ensuring that our currencies are stable to match our development needs. And behold, everybody in class was like, no, it's because it's a Chinese, it's because of this, it's because of that. But interestingly, he gave us an assignment, and in the course of doing that assignment, I was able to read through the lines, even in an IMF document, that stipulates that irrespective of what the IMF gives to you, what is most important on that list is your own development. And that is exactly where the Chinese hangs on their own argument that if our own development is more important, then why should we dance to all your tools? And how were the Chinese able to do that? They practically translate any document that is given to them into Chinese, which helps them to read line by line, alphabet by alphabet, and full stop by full stop. So by so doing, they were able to see all the hidden agenda that maybe have been inscribed into any document that is given.
It is not possible to analyze the development of a people without considering their cultural institutions, since lived realities such as culture and traditions are what represent the existence of humans. For instance, language of a particular people is best to be used for the expression of the lived realities of those people. African people need to consider the revitalization of their languages towards development of the continent.
Language is very significant. It is a vehicle that transports culture from one generation to the other.
The Europeans were not speaking Yoruba, they were not speaking Zulu, they were not speaking, Xhosa, they were not speaking Ga or Ewe. They were speaking English, French, Spanish, German, and Portuguese. And our people did not understand those languages. So the first weapon of subjugating people to perpetual enslavement is language. Look at South Africa. There are 11 cultures in South Africa, but they all wanted to die for English. They went and demonstrated when the Africans decided that they were going to use African language as the official language. They fought for English. Nobody fought for Zulu or for Xhosa. They all fought for English, and they died for English. That's how messed up we are.
When you speak Fati, then they will tie a rope around your neck, saying that you are a shameful person, you are not able to speak English. So that kind of orientation, the person grows up to have a very negative attitude towards their own local language and would prefer the white man's language towards us. So that's what the education system does to us.
Our children tend to go to French schools, German schools, even the Nigerian curriculum, and we're proud of it. In fact, when we go to parties, we try to say, I pay 10 million, you pay 5 million. For the English that they can't even speak at the end of the day. I'm unapologetic about it. So we need to conserve our values, our language, our culture, our philosophy, and our ideology.
There's a woman from New Zealand that came to Ibadan, UI. She lived there for 15 years, and she used to go to Dubai market every day. And she said at the end, of all the languages in the world, the Yorubas have the best numerals.
Wow.
Okay? Because when the child is using the Yoruba numbers, you're doing three things. You're doing subtraction, you're doing addition, and you're doing logic.
Wow.
Okay? Ení, èjì, ẹ̀ta, ẹ̀rin, àrún, ẹ̀fà, ẹ̀jọ, èje, ẹ̀jọ, ẹ̀sán, ẹ̀wá, mọ́kànlá, mẹ́rìnlá, méjìlá, mẹ́tàlá, mẹ́rìnlá, mẹ́ẹ̀ẹ́dógún, that's logic. Mẹ́rìndínlógún, that's subtraction. Mọ́kànlélógún, that's addition. Àádọ́gbọ̀n, that's logic. So the child is able to do 3 things simultaneously with just numbers. That's why they are able to do something very, very significant. They can master any task. That's what she said.
It's hard to find societies that have developed using the language of other people. We may not be able to achieve a different direction of development, a different pattern of development that will speak to our own reality without first going back to our indigenous languages. In our indigenous languages, there are directions as dictated by the Oduifa that can lead us to a different path, and yet we are happy in our environment. We are happy to live good lives without necessarily measuring the kind of development we have in the standard of other people. Measuring our development in the standard of other people is the beginning of the collapse of our civilization. Of course, our civilization has virtually collapsed in this manner.
What exactly do you want? Do we want as a continent? We need to look inward. We need to develop endogenous growth model that will take into consideration our cultural values, what we place premium on. There is the need for us to have a shift in our mindset if we really want economic development, if we really want development to be what it is, and we really want to rub shoulders with developed countries of the world.
I have in mind the Umunna and the Umunna apprenticeship system in Igbo land, where you don't need to have beggars all over the place. As you come up and you are from my lineage, they say, Jim, take this man, go and train him. You train him and then you empower him with some resources to set up his own. He becomes an entrepreneur. You are not training him for him to become your servant forever. It is for a specified time period, maybe 5 years. You now set him up. They say set him up, support him. And then he grows. And because his wares, that is his articles are limited in size, when big customers come, he goes to his master's place, carry big quantity, sell, make his own small profit. His master will also make profit. And they are all growing together. And they are now going to China, going all over the world, blending with the global system.
If we do not deconstruct and provide alternatives, the way the Indians have successfully done, the way the Japanese have done, the way the Chinese have done, the way the Koreans have done, through decolonization, scholarship, and entry points, we might just continue to wallow in this quagmire. If we have to give ourselves a measure of movement from our marginalized status in the universe of development, we must insist that what works for us is not what they say works for us. It's what works for us in a self-determined way, and we must retain a great deal of the autonomy of not only initiative but also action.
While we acknowledge the universal ideals of development that resonate across people and cultures, we must not fail to recognize the distinguishing norms and values of African concepts like Ubuntu, Ujamaa, and the Yoruba Honor Code of Omoluabi. These elevate the African development agenda at individual and communal levels.
The embrace of Western hegemony has led to the neglect of African cultural assets like language, history, indigenous thoughts, and social customs. Reversing this unfortunate trend, there is need to create an intervention in the educational sector and in the nodes of thought system of all Africans. We must also ensure that the norms and practices that amplify African development trajectory is mainstreamed in the general African indigenous system. We must also ensure that the entertainment industry of Africa is elevated and made available to all.
Africa's development requires extensive governance shifts. First is the shift away from the faulty premise that economic prosperity is the end goal of development. Second is the emphasis on the materiality of infrastructure to measuring the actual impact of infrastructure on the well-being of citizens. And finally, a shift is required from the emphasis on strongmen and state-building elite to emphasizing the building of strong institutions where good governance and human rights are entrenched.
While the definition of African development remains elusive, we are convinced that at individual, community, country, and continental levels, work needs to be done by all thinkers, citizens, and leaders to achieve the aspiration of this great continent, while promoting the potentials and dignity of our people.
It's not so much what we do for the human person, it is where our inspiration comes from. I think that is what is important.